Today we're going to cover 30 mistakes that new drone and even seasoned drone pilots make. And to do this, my friend Jeven Dovey came all the way to Alaska. We're going to cover this. Let's jump into it.
One mistake that new pilots make is flying over reflective surfaces or water and thinking that the downward sensors will work. It's not always the case. When you're flying over something like ocean waves, well, the ocean's moving up and down, and the drone might not always realize that the water's moving because it's a reflective surface and it can't judge how far the distance is between the drone and the wave. So what will happen is your drone will crash into the water. And this could also happen in other reflective surfaces as well. So if you're flying with reflective surfaces on the ground, just be aware of how high you are from that surface, because the drone might not be able to judge exactly how close it is and you might end up crashing.
And another mistake a lot of people make is thinking that sensors will detect everything, and they really won't. Things like power lines, small branches, or branches without leaves on them, these sensors generally won't pick those things up, and you have a really high chance of running into anything like that. So be really cautious when you're flying around really small objects, because the sensors generally really won't pick them up.
Now, another mistake is not understanding how your obstacle avoidance is going to work when you're tracking yourself. So I like to use the tracking feature all the time when I'm out shooting by myself. And there's two ways that your sensors will work when you come towards an object. And so if you're moving and there's like a tree or a bush in the way, well, the drone can do two things, and you can set this up in the menu. It could either brake, where it's just gonna stop, or it could try to move up and around that object. Now, that feature works great, and it's gonna try to find you when it moves up and around whatever that object is. However, it's not always perfect. And I've definitely been in some situations where it swings up and around, it's trying to find me, and it starts moving really fast, and then there's another object off to the side, and your side sensors, well, they don't exist, so it just runs right into something. So you need to understand the limitations of your sensors when you're tracking yourself, and might be something that you should go out and just test in some different situations to see how the drone reacts when it's trying to find you moving around an object.
A mistake a lot of us made as new drone pilots was taking off in dusty environments, and that's really bad for the drone. One, all that dust gets in the motors and causes issues, but it can also cover the camera lens, which then really kind of ruins any footage you might get. So an easy way around this is to get a drone landing mat. It gives you a nice big area to land on and take off from. But as you get more experience, you can also do things like learn to hand launch and hand catch your drone. But that's a little bit advanced, so I wouldn't start with that. I definitely just start with something like a drone mat if you plan to fly from places that have lots of dust or sand, small debris.
So one mistake is flying too close to wildlife. If you take your drone off and you're flying around birds like seagulls at the beach, well, there's a good chance that they're gonna come after your drone. And there's also stories of new pilots flying near wildlife and disturbing them and causing some bigger issues, which ends up hurting the whole drone community. So just try to keep a respectful distance from wildlife when you're out filming.
One thing a lot of new drone pilots don't understand is how easy it is to lose these little control sticks. Either when you're screwing them in and then they fall out in a place like this, they'll disappear forever. There is a handy little storage place back here, but it's important to be really careful when you're taking them off or putting them on. And another thing I don't think a lot of people understand is how fragile these propellers are. I've broken a few of them just taking this out of my camera bag or putting it in. And so one thing I really recommend is make sure you have extra sets of propellers, and because these ones screw on and off, you gotta make sure you've got that little screwdriver. Otherwise, you're not gonna be able to fly it at all.
One big mistake is not checking your propellers before a flight or after you're done flying. So if you accidentally nick something, well, you might put some damage on those propellers. Also, if they've just been in your bag and they've been moving around, well, there's a chance that there could be a crack or there could be a break. And if you take the drone off and there's a crack in the propeller, well, there's a chance that it could break in half and then your drone could just fall out of the sky. It does happen. So make sure every time that you're taking your drone out to fly, look at the propellers, make sure that they're ready to go. And one thing that you're gonna wanna do is just make sure you always have a set of backup propellers, and always make sure you have that little screwdriver so you can take your propellers on and off when you need to replace them.
Another big mistake a lot of people make is not knowing your stopping distance. In other words, when you're flying towards something and you let off the throttle, it takes a minute for the drone to stop. And this changes based on how fast you're going. So if you're flying in cinematic mode or a slow mode, the stopping distance can be much shorter, but if you're flying in sport mode or the fastest mode, it's gonna take a lot longer to stop because it's going that much faster. And so learning your stopping distance is really important before you start flying really close to or really close to toward something before you accidentally run into it or end up in a tree.
One big mistake that a lot of new pilots make is getting out to a location and not having an SD card or not having a card that you can format. I mean, I've actually done this before a few times, and it's really frustrating to go somewhere and not be able to record or only have like a couple minutes to record. So you just want to make sure before you go out and you're trying to get to some epic spot, check your memory cards, because you'll want to make sure that you have a completely empty memory card that you can use and fill up. Also, a big thing that I like to do is have big memory cards. I use 128s when I'm out filming, and so that way I just never run out of space when I'm out filming.
A mistake a lot of newer drone pilots make is not understanding the different speed modes that are on most drones. Most of them have 3. One is sport mode or ludicrous mode, or it might be different depending on your manufacturer, but that's basically the drone is all out as fast as it can possibly go and basically doesn't hold anything back. And if it has obstacle avoidance is pretty much off all of the time on every drone. And then you've got your normal mode, which is pretty fast, but gives you a little bit higher level of control. And then you have cinematic mode, or the slowest mode on most drones. And that gives you these really smooth, slow movements that give you a lot of really cinematic feel, but you really need to know how the drone responds in each one of these modes so that you know when to use them and you understand how the drone operates and responds to your controls when you're operating in that cinematic mode, the normal mode, or the sport mode.
Another big mistake when it comes to your memory cards is not having fast enough memory cards. So if you use slower cards, you get a cheap card or something, well, you're gonna have footage that stutters. You can see from here, this is footage shot on a card that's not fast enough. And when you're out flying and you have this happening, you might just think the transmission's cutting out, but what's actually happening is the card's not fast enough to continue writing that clip. And so when you get back to edit, well, all your footage is gonna be choppy and unusable. So just make sure that you're using fast enough cards, and to see what's compatible, you can go to DJI's website and see the list of cards that are accepted with the DJI Mini 3.
A mistake a lot of new pilots make, and I made certainly when I was first starting out, is not understanding how to use ND filters properly. I mean, I've done a whole video about it. It's gonna be linked down in the description. But for your first few flights, don't worry about it. Just go out, fly, learn to fly your drone. But as you learn to fly your drone and get more confident, it's really important to understand how to use ND filters so that your videos and your photos can look the best they can possibly look from your drone.
The next big mistake is not letting your drone set the home point before you take off and fly. So I'm out here on the beach. I could take the drone up and it connects to the controller and I could start flying. And what I could do is just start flying out over the ocean. Well, the drone needs to lock onto the GPS. And once it locks onto GPS up in the sky, well, then it sets the home point. So if you're already flying and you're way out over the ocean and just like in sport mode, flying away, well, it's gonna set that home point somewhere where you don't want that home point to be set. And then so when you return to home or you're getting low on battery, it's gonna return to that point that's like out in the ocean. So just make sure that before you take off and fly that your drone connects to the GPS signal and it sets that home point.
A mistake I made with my first few drones, and other beginners make as well, is not making sure that the drone is updated and activated and that everything's ready to go before you go out to fly. You go out to fly, you end up finding out that you have to update something and you've got to activate it before you can even take off the ground. So when you first take your drone out of the box, it's important to turn it on, connect everything to your phone, and make sure there are no updates, and make sure everything's activated and that the drone is ready to go before you go out to try and find some awesome place to go fly. For the next 15 mistakes, you need to go to this guy's channel, and the video's linked right there.